The revolutionary code of individual rights and political economic freedom transfigured the Western world in the 19th century. But the rest of the globe remained mired in tribalism, dictatorship, endless savage warfare, and extreme backwardness. In the 1960s, large parts of Asia, Africa, and South America were so destitute and famine-ridden to be as poor as pre-capitalist Europe was. Indeed, today, early in the 21st century, many nations of the third world, of the non-capitalist third world, possess per capita incomes below $300, which means hundreds of millions of human beings, probably billions, in the non-capitalist world subsist on less than $1 per day. In the late 19th century, European colonialists conquered large parts of Asia and Africa. But despite their often brutal rule, they at least built infrastructure and improved the local economies, especially, of course, the British. For example, from Peter Bauer, the leading economic historian of the colonial period, from Peter Bauer, quote, "Much of British colonial Africa was transformed during the colonial period. Education was significantly improved, railways and roads were built, incidences of lethal diseases were reduced, and slavery, slave trading, and famine were practically eliminated," unquote. When the colonialists packed their bags and went home in the years following World War II, all local economic development ceased. All that remained was a vastly worse brutality. For example, China, North Korea, Vietnam, and Cambodia regressed into the most repressive totalitarian system of history, communism, which has murdered at least 100 million innocent victims in its 90-year reign of terror. If you want the brutal facts on that, read the Black Book of Communism, if you can get to 800 pages. No, the subtitle tells you everything you need to know. Crimes, terror, repression. The great thing about the Black Book of Communism, and not just that it was written by European Marxists, Stéphane Courtois et al., European Marxist intellectuals. The great thing about the Black Book of Communism is that it's based on research into the archives of the secret police of the former Soviet Union and its East European empire. This is information straight from the horse's mouth. You know exactly what Stalin, and his peers in the communist nations did. Coming right out of secret police archives in the communist countries. 100 million innocent victims, at minimum, in 80 years. Now, at the same time as communism became dominant throughout large parts of Asia, African nations, ruled by an endless succession of brutal dictators, whether of a socialist, military, or tribal variety, wallowed in one form of repression or another, whether incessant, bloody civil warfare, Somalia, unspeakable tribal slaughter, Rwanda, endless persecution, murder, and enslavement of hundreds of thousands of blacks, Sudan, mind-boggling corruption and the complete destitution of the economic system, so that I don't know how many people starved, Zaire under Mobutu, the theft of privately owned farms, murder of the farmers, and result in massive famine, Zimbabwe under Mugabe, etc. Many African peoples today are far less free under brutal indigenous dictators than they ever were under British colonial rule. More than 225 years after the American Revolution, freedom is virtually unknown around the globe. That is an appalling and heartbreaking truth. More than 225 years after the American Revolution, individual rights and freedom are virtually unknown around the globe. You can just read the introduction to Capitalism Unbound, for that. But, very quietly, the post-World War II period also gave rise to profoundly positive developments. The great moral political struggle of the era was capitalism versus socialism, freedom versus totalitarianism, individualism versus collectivism. Not all of the starving third world countries were conquered by the communists. Some, protected by America and her allies, were able to live in freedom. And because they were free, they were able to choose. to decide between the opposing systems of socialism and capitalism. The most historic, important, and momentous development and positive development in the world in the past 60 years is the spread of capitalism into the non-Western countries of the Third World. This phenomenon, too rarely discussed in our schools, universities, and media, is the single greatest hope for world peace and prosperity. The destitute countries of Asia led the way. The shining light of late 20th century global capitalism and the paradigm for the subsequent Asian tigers was Japan. The American occupation of Japan under General Douglas MacArthur transformed the country from a brutal military dictatorship, which is, put it mildly, into the freest country of Asia. The Japanese Constitution of 1947, drawn up in MacArthur's headquarters, helped establish a limited government in Japan for the first time. In conjunction with the other laws of the American occupation, the new Constitution brought freedom and individual rights to Japan for the first time. Economically, the new Japan was established on essentially a free enterprise basis, embodying substantial elements of private ownership of businesses and farms and of profit seeking. By the early 1950s, Japan's post-war reconstruction was complete, and it stood on the threshold of spectacular economic progress. For the next 20 years, Japan achieved a growth rate that averaged close to 10% annually. Japanese productivity in the late 20th century became legendary because in mere decades, Japan joined the world leaders, indeed, in many cases became the world leader in the manufacture of automobiles, watches, radios, televisions, cameras, steel, and such high-tech products as jets, semiconductors, computers, and telecommunications equipment. Today, Japan has a per capita income roughly in the high $20,000 range, making it truly an economic powerhouse. America had helped create an economic giant, and it was good. The other leading light of post-World War II global capitalism was Hong Kong, already described. But the growth of Taiwan has been just as spectacular. In 1949, after the nationalist military defeat on the mainland, the island's per capita income was an abysmal $100, which means people were living on roughly 30 cents a day. But Chiang Kai-shek, the political leader, sought to create an environment in which entrepreneurs would flourish. He appointed such economic advisors as K.Y. Yin and K.T. Lee, both strong advocates of the free market system. Lee realized that the best thing a government could do was provide a rational legal framework that would establish the rule of law and protect private property. He proceeded to put himself in the shoes of investors and look at the situation from their perspective. Taiwan opened up to foreign investment and world trade and phased out protectionism at home, strengthening the domestic firms by subjecting them to foreign competition at home. The result of Taiwan's freedom was a spectacular climb from rags to riches. Its per capita income in 1998, 49 years later, was roughly $14,000, meaning that its wealth had increased 140 times in 50 years. I mean, these are historically unprecedented numbers. You want it in different terms? Its per capita wealth doubled 7 times in 50 years. I mean, this is unbelievable. I mean, this is the paradigm for the starving, statist, unfree third world nations to rise out of the abysmal poverty in which they've subsisted for many years. Now communist China, by contrast, was a brutally oppressive dictatorship where Mao Zedong, we know today, from access to the archives of various communist nations, Mao Zedong, we know today, is the leading man